The church stands alone at the edge of the old forest, its gray stone walls scarred by centuries of rain and silence. No roads lead to it, no signs mark its presence. And yet, every villager knows where it is, as if the structure itself leaves an imprint on memory. The closer one draws, the heavier the air becomes, charged with a weight that feels older than belief itself. The walls are impossibly high, built from stones so tightly fitted together that even time has failed to pry them apart. Moss creeps in the cracks like veins feeding a living organism. But what makes the place impossible to comprehend is its completeness. The church has no doors, no windows, no visible entrance of any kind. It is as if it was never meant to be entered, only endured. Historians who stumble upon its name in scattered parish records describe it as the silent cathedral, but no formal documentation explains why it exists. The architecture is Romanesque in some places, Gothic in others, as though fragments of different centuries were forced together into a seamless whole. There are carvings along its base, worn nearly invisible, symbols that do not belong to any known scripture. To the eye, they seem decorative, but villagers speak of those symbols pulsing faintly in moonlight, as though whispering their own forgotten language. But what unsettles the heart most is not the structure itself. It is the life that seems to stir inside it. On winter nights, when mist rises from the ground, faint lights flicker behind those sealed walls, like candles carried through invisible corridors. And sometimes, when the wind carries just right, the air fills with the soft hum of hymns. Voices, many voices, rising and falling in unison. A choir that has no congregation. No one has ever broken through its stone, though more than one fool has tried. Hammers splinter, chisels dull, even modern drills burn out against its surface. The church rejects intrusion with a silence that borders on hostility. Those who have leaned too close, pressing their ear to the wall to listen, come away pale, muttering of vibrations deep inside, like the steady thrum of a heartbeat. Some never return at all. The villagers know better. They tell their children not to wander there, not to look too long, not to linger when the sounds drift through the fog. And yet, every few decades, a stranger arrives, driven by curiosity, by scholarship, or by obsession. They photograph, they sketch, they theorize, but all leave unsatisfied, clutching more questions than they came with, as though the church allows only confusion to pass beyond its perimeter. Some believe it is a relic of a forgotten sect, a sect so devoted to silence that they entomb themselves inside. Others suggest the walls hide something not meant for human eyes, a scripture too dangerous, a presence too sacred or too profane. The truth is, the villagers do not care to know. For them, the mystery itself is enough. It stands as a reminder that not all walls are meant to be broken, not all doors are meant to be found, and yet whispers persist. An old woman who once lived by the forest's edge claimed she had seen shadows moving across its upper wall, figures holding candles, gliding without sound. A woodcutter swore he heard bells inside, faint but steady, even though the church has no steeple. Such stories, dismissed as superstition, spread through generations until the church became less of a building and more of a wound in the land, a wound that never heals. The longer one gazes at it, the more wrong it feels. Some report vertigo, others a sense of being watched. A few collapse into seizures, their bodies convulsing until they are dragged away from the site, after which they awaken unable to recall what they saw. Whatever breathes behind those walls seems to reach outward, searching, probing, reminding intruders that the barrier exists for a reason. And yet, the most disturbing rumor is not about lights or hymns. It is about the sound of knocking. Always faint, always slow, like knuckles against stone, as if someone or something is waiting to be let out. Generations have whispered about a church that appears on no maps, standing in the mist-soaked valleys of Central Europe. Its stones are older than the village itself, and yet no records exist of its construction. Some elders insist it was not built by human hands at all. They say it rose overnight, a sanctuary born from sorrow, summoned by voices long forgotten. The oldest story traces back to the 14th century, when plague tore through the land. Entire families vanished in days, leaving only empty homes and echoes of grief. According to legend, a group of monks sealed themselves inside the church, vowing never to leave. They sang night and day, not for salvation, but to guide the dying across the threshold of despair. Their chant was said to linger in the air, even after their bodies turned to dust. Those who passed by in silence claimed to hear the faint murmur of a choir, neither mournful nor joyous, but something in between. Later generations altered the tale. In the 18th century, when famine struck, villagers said the church sang on its own. No monks, no worshippers, only sound flowing from cracked windows, weaving through fields of withered wheat. A priest who investigated returned pale and trembling, declaring he had seen lips moving in the dark, though no faces stood behind them. He lived the rest of his years in silence, refusing to enter another church again. Others insist the silent choir is not a curse, but a blessing. In the late 19th century, mothers brought their fevered children to the threshold of the church, pressing their ears against the ancient wood. Some swore the hymns soothed the sickness, calming their little ones into peaceful sleep. But just as many claimed the opposite, that those who listened too long never woke at all. Contradictions deepen with every telling. Some say the building is always warm inside, a place untouched by winter's frost. Others describe it as so cold the breath freezes in the air. To some, the voices are gentle, harmonies that feel like home. To others, the choir is sharp and unrelenting, like knives hidden in song. Each story clashes with the next, and yet one truth remains constant. The voices never stop. Modern accounts only add to the mystery. Travelers with recording devices claim the microphones pick up faint tones, though nothing is audible to the human ear at the time. A spectral vibration, hidden in frequencies beyond the living. One researcher compared the patterns to Gregorian chants, layered with dissonance that defies natural rhythm. Another dismissed it as interference, a trick of old stone and shifting wind. Still, when asked if he would spend a night inside, his answer was silence. The church is no longer visited by locals. The younger generation avoids it altogether, calling it cursed, while the old ones shake their heads and mutter prayers. Yet the building remains, weathered, unyielding, and humming with something no one can explain. Perhaps the legends are nothing more than echoes of human fear, shaped by centuries of suffering. Or perhaps, as some insist, the silent choir is eternal, a song without beginning or end, carried not by voices of flesh, but by something far older. And so the contradictions remain, a sanctuary both feared and revered, where every story tells a different truth, yet all agree on one thing: the choir still sings. In the dim vaults of a forgotten monastery, a collection of manuscripts lay hidden for centuries, sealed in a chest that bore no name. When they were uncovered in the late 19th century, scholars at first dismissed them as eccentric sketches strange, architectural doodles from a long-dead monk with too much time and imagination. But as the pages were studied more closely, their unsettling coherence began to emerge. What had seemed chaotic at first became precise. Architectural diagrams laid out with the kind of exacting detail found in master builders' guilds of the Renaissance. Yet something was disturbingly wrong. The structures had walls, corridors, foundations, and soaring ceilings. But there was one feature that every design shared. There was no entrance. These were blueprints for sanctuaries that could not be entered nor exited. The monastery's records linked the manuscripts to a figure known only as the Architect of Silence, a shadowy presence in 17th century Italy. No real name, no birthplace, no guild affiliation could be traced. He was, it seemed, a phantom in the history of architecture. And yet, his manuscripts revealed a hand that was not amateurish. The mathematics were advanced, the geometry flawless, and the measurements aligned perfectly with proportions later found in sacred geometry texts. Some scholars argued that these structures were never intended for human use. Instead, they whispered of containment, a sanctuary not for worship, but for imprisonment. A chilling possibility took shape. These sealed chambers were meant to house objects, or perhaps entities, that were never meant to see the light of day. Within the margins of the manuscripts were cryptic notes written in Latin, some smeared, others barely legible. Translated, they spoke of vessels of corruption, echoes that walk, and the necessity of a silence eternal. One passage described the danger of a relic too powerful to be left unguarded, a fragment of fire clothed in stone, sealed so that mankind would never stumble upon it again. Another hinted at the breath of the profane, an unholy presence requiring walls so thick not even prayer could seep through. Historians tried to rationalize it. Perhaps these were allegories, meditations disguised as blueprints. Or maybe the architect of silence was a visionary, experimenting with philosophical concepts of space and absence. Yet the detail was too specific, the calculations too exact, to dismiss as mere fantasy. The mystery deepened when researchers found uncanny similarities between these designs and certain abandoned chapels scattered across Europe. In France, a small stone structure in the Ardennes forest with no visible entrance matched almost perfectly with one of the manuscripts. Its walls had no doorways, no windows, no weaknesses, just a stone shell rising from the earth as though designed to lock something in. Local villagers refused to approach it, claiming that on some nights a low hum reverberated from within, like the breathing of a buried giant. In Spain, a Hermitage near Toledo bore carvings identical to sketches in the manuscripts. It too was sealed, its stonework suggesting no mortal hand could ever open it without reducing it to rubble. Legends claimed it had been built over a cursed reliquary stolen during the Crusades, an object so dangerous it required exile from both light and touch. The most unnerving discovery came in the Italian Alps. Buried beneath a monastery crypt was a bricked-up chamber, accessible only by breaking through a thick outer wall. Inside was a perfectly square room, empty except for a single blackened altar. No doors, no windows, no indication of its original purpose. Tests on the mortar dated it precisely to the 17th century, the very era of the manuscripts. It was as though the architect's designs had leapt from parchment into reality. What drove a man or an order to build prisons without prisoners, temples without congregations? Was it superstition? A theological experiment? Or was it an act of desperation, born of knowledge too dangerous to share? The blueprints themselves hinted at fear. Angles designed to confuse the senses, proportions intended to create disorientation, acoustics calculated to swallow sound entirely. These were not mistakes. They were deliberate choices, methods to suppress something, to mute its presence. As word of the manuscript spread, so did the unease. Some researchers who spent long nights poring over the diagrams complained of vivid dreams, visions of figures pressed against walls from the inside, their hands leaving no mark, only a sense of weight. Others claimed the geometry itself seemed to warp perception, as if staring too long at the lines pulled the viewer into a space that did not belong to the world outside. Eventually, the documents were withdrawn from public archives. Officially, this was for conservation purposes, but whispers suggested otherwise. A growing number of scholars feared that the very act of studying the blueprints risked replicating their intent, that by drawing them, copying them, reconstructing them in models, humanity might once again build a cage and give form to the thing it was meant to hold. The architect of silence vanished into history. No grave, no signature, no testament remained. Only the blueprints survived, scattered in fragments, surfacing in monasteries, private collections, and auction houses. Each time they appeared, they were quickly hidden again. Were they simply the fevered imaginings of a forgotten visionary? Or were they maps to prisons humanity once required? Reminders of a time when something unspeakable walked too close to the threshold of our world? What we know is this: the designs exist, the structures stand, and the silence they were built to contain still lingers in stone. The Vatican is a palace of whispers. Its walls, older than nations, contain centuries of secrets never meant to be touched by the ordinary world. And yet, every so often, a fragment slips through the cracks. One such fragment came not from a library or archive, but from a private letter yellowed, brittle, and hidden for generations. In it, a Vatican archivist wrote of something sealed beneath the foundation of one of Rome's most sacred sites. He did not name it outright. He only described it as a relic too dangerous to move. The phrasing was careful, deliberate, as though even the act of writing down the details carried a curse. A relic too dangerous to move. What could that mean? Some historians insist the letter referred to an early Christian manuscript, one whose contents could tear at the roots of Catholic doctrine itself. A forbidden gospel, perhaps, that spoke of Jesus not as the divine Son of God, but as a man among men, fallible, married, mortal. If such a text were uncovered, the implications would ripple through centuries of faith, collapsing certainty into silence. Others reject the idea of parchment and ink. They argue the letter alludes to something physical, something that required chains and mortar to contain. In hushed circles, one theory persists: that a statue or idol was buried there, not from reverence, but from fear. Pagan artifacts, brought from conquered lands, were known to unsettle early Christians. What if this relic carried a reputation so dark, so inseparably linked with misfortune, that even touching it could doom the faithful? The Church, unable to destroy it, might have done the next best thing: sealed it away, entombed forever beneath holy ground. And yet, there is a third, more chilling possibility. Some theologians speculate that the relic is not an object at all, but a body. A corpse bound in secrecy, perhaps belonging to a heretic who once defied the papacy. Or worse, a figure revered by rival sects who claimed to hold truths the Vatican could not allow to spread. To bury such a body beneath sacred stone would be an act of concealment, a silencing. It would also explain the archivist's cryptic warning, too dangerous to move. Not because of structural fragility, but because of what that body represented. The letter makes no mention of where exactly beneath the foundation the relic lies. Some place it under the Basilica of St. John Lateran, the oldest church in Rome, where centuries of papal coronations unfolded. Others point to the crypts of St. Peter's Basilica, where layers of forgotten chambers stretch like veins under the earth. Pilgrims tread unknowingly above, their prayers echoing over a secret the Church has guarded in silence. The danger of this relic, whatever it may be, is not just in its physical presence. It is in the questions it provokes. If it is a text, why was it hidden instead of destroyed? If it is an idol, why entomb it in the heart of Christian power? And if it is a body, whose bones lie beneath the altar of Rome's faith? Each possibility is heavy with consequence, enough to explain why the archivist's hand trembled as he committed his words to paper. For centuries, the Vatican has mastered the art of suppression. Books vanish, records are rewritten, artifacts are spirited away into vaults where only the highest authorities may look upon them. But burying something beneath the foundation of a church? That is different. That is not erasure, it is containment. A choice made not for the sake of order, but for survival. Some whisper that the relic itself is cursed, that those who stumbled too close to it met with madness or sudden death. Folklore clings to the story like ivy to stone, insisting that priests who once tried to excavate the lower chambers spoke of strange sounds, low hums reverberating in the rock, shadows that moved without light, air that thickened until it felt alive. Of course, these are the stories the Church dismisses as superstition. Yet superstition often grows from seeds of truth. What endures is the weight of that phrase, too dangerous to move. It implies an awareness, a decision made not once, but reinforced across centuries. Successive popes must have read the same warning. Successive guardians must have sworn to keep the floor unbroken. The relic remains not because it is forgotten, but because it is remembered too well. And so it stays, encased beneath marble and prayer, sealed by the passage of time and the silence of those who know. We may never discover whether it is ink, stone, or flesh, but we know this. Something rests beneath Rome's holiest ground, something that the Vatican itself has judged unfit to see the light of day. The floor above it gleams with gold and candles, trodden daily by the faithful. Below, in the dark, the relic waits. At night, the village seemed to hold its breath. The church, silent and looming against the starlit sky, peered lifeless to the eye yet. Those who dared to linger near its crumbling stone walls spoke of a glow that could not be explained. From cracks in the foundation, from the gaps in the rotting wood of its doors, a pale radiance would seep into the night, as though the building itself were exhaling light. Generations of villagers described it the same way. Not the flicker of lanterns, not the warmth of firelight, but a cold, bluish gleam like moonlight condensed into liquid form. On certain nights, the light seemed to ripple, pulsing faintly, as if keeping time with an unseen heart. Those who witnessed it often refused to go back, saying the glow left a chill in their bones, the feeling that something ancient had noticed them and would not forget. But light was not the only thing that haunted the church. Local reports from the 1920s record strange sounds echoes of organ music drifting into the night long after the building had been abandoned. The tones were described as both beautiful and dreadful, notes that rose slowly, hovering in the air, then collapsed into low vibrations that rattled the chest. A constable investigating in 1927 noted in his report that he and his partner heard an unmistakable sound of an organ pipe, though no instrument has been present in the building for many years. His partner refused to step inside after the incident, insisting that the sound grew louder the closer he approached, yet seemed to vanish the moment he crossed the threshold. By the 1950s, the lore of the church had evolved into something darker. Residents spoke of shadows moving along the inside walls when no one was within. Farmers returning late from the fields described walking past the church and sensing movement beside them, as though someone were pacing them step for step, though no figure was ever seen. A newspaper clipping from 1954 tells of a group of youths who attempted to spend the night in the church as a dare. Only 2 remained until morning. They reported that in the hours before dawn, the corners of the church grew unnaturally black, darker than shadow should allow. They claimed those dark spaces shifted, creeping along the walls and floor, stretching out like hands. The boys fled after one of them swore a shadow had passed directly over his chest, leaving him gasping for breath as though his lungs had been crushed. Skeptics, of course, dismissed the accounts as exaggerations, tricks of the mind fueled by fear and folklore. Yet modern investigations complicate that dismissal. In 1998, a team of paranormal researchers conducted overnight studies using electromagnetic field meters and infrared cameras. Their logs reveal repeated surges of energy localized to the church's eastern wall, corresponding to the very place villagers had described the glow for centuries. Infrared recordings captured floating anomalies, points of heat that appeared briefly, then vanished without pattern. More chilling still, in one sequence of frames, a humanoid silhouette appeared against the far wall, darker than the shadows around it. The team noted that no physical object could account for the shape. Further studies in the early 2000s uncovered peculiar geological factors, a convergence of limestone and granite beneath the church foundations. Some geologists argue that such natural formations can create piezoelectric effects, electrical charges generated under pressure. That may manifest as faint light. It is a plausible explanation for the mysterious glow, but it does not account for the organ music, the moving shadows, or the testimonies of those who left the church trembling, convinced they had been seen. For the villagers, science was never enough. Their relationship with the place was rooted not in theory, but in survival. Parents warned their children to keep distance after sunset. Hunters who strayed too close to the building at night often returned shaken, unwilling to speak of what they saw. One elderly woman interviewed in 1972 claimed that the shadows were alive, but not like us. They wait, they listen. She refused to pass the church even in daylight. The persistence of these stories, repeated across generations, builds a pattern that cannot be ignored. The church became more than a ruin, it became a boundary. To some, it was a relic of faith, scarred but enduring. To others, it was a wound in the land, leaking something neither holy nor natural. And for those who stumbled upon the lights or the living shadows, it was a reminder that certain places hold on to memory, refusing to let it fade. By the dawn of the 21st century, the church stood as it always had, silent, half broken, its roof caved in, its windows long gone. Yet the stories did not fade with time. Travelers still stopped to record the eerie glow on film, their footage capturing pale flickers where no light source should exist. Paranormal enthusiasts still camped nearby, lured by the hope of documenting shadows that moved against reason. And villagers, those who had grown up beneath its silhouette, still lowered their voices when speaking of it, as though even the air carried ears. Whether a trick of geology, a shared delusion, or the residue of something older than history, the strange lights and living shadows remain. The church refuses to collapse into mere ruin. It endures, as though held upright by the very forces that unsettle those who draw near. In its silence, it waits, and in its waiting, it remembers. They were the guardians of silence, men sworn to a life of discipline and prayer. Yet history records that some of these monks and priests, sentinels assigned to guard sacred sites, simply vanished. No final testimony, no body discovered, only fragments of warnings left behind in letters and journals. One such account comes from the late 15th century. A monastery deep in the Carpathian Mountains received a directive. Assign 2 brothers to maintain the chapel at the edge of the woods. Both men were experienced, steadfast, trusted by their order. But after just 3 nights, they were gone. The doors of the chapel were locked from within. The candles had melted to stubs, their wax pooled and hardened on the stone floor. On the altar lay the brothers' rosaries, carefully placed as though set down in the middle of prayer. Search parties scoured the forest for weeks, but there was no trace. The only clue was a journal belonging to one of the brothers, its final entry little more than a desperate plea. Do not linger near the trees after dusk. The silence is not empty. It listens. Another case emerged in Sicily, in the archives of a Benedictine abbey. A priest stationed to guard a reliquary reported strange shadows moving at the edge of the courtyard. He wrote of hearing voices in languages he could not recognize, some sharp and guttural, others melodic and distant, like chants carried on the wind. His notes grew increasingly frantic until they stopped altogether. When the abbot arrived weeks later, the quarters were undisturbed. The priest's bedding remained neatly folded, his belongings untouched. But his robes were found hanging from the branches of an olive tree outside the abbey walls, as if carefully placed there. No explanation was ever given. What is most striking is the consistency of these disappearances across regions, cultures, and centuries. From the Himalayan hermitages to cloisters in the Pyrenees, the stories repeat. Monks who accepted night vigils simply did not return. Letters written by survivors, those who served the shifts before the vanishings, described the same dread. A sudden stillness, the absence of insects, the sensation of being watched even within locked walls. Some insisted the ground itself seemed to shift underfoot, as though the earth exhaled. One survivor from a Tibetan monastery confessed that he heard a deep humming sound at night, low and resonant, vibrating through the stone floors. His final record before abandoning his post was chillingly brief. "It wants us alone." Scholars later tried to dismiss these stories as superstition, attributing them to isolation, paranoia, or the fragile minds of men cut off from the world. Yet the archival records are difficult to ignore. Monasteries kept meticulous logs of their personnel. When 2 or 3 guardians disappeared without explanation, those records note their absence plainly, sometimes marked only with a cross beside their names. What cannot be explained away so easily are the letters left behind, frantic, fearful, and consistent in tone across thousands of miles. Even stranger are the whispered accounts of monks who reappeared months or even years later, but were unrecognizable to their brethren. Pale, weakened, and unable to speak more than fragments, they seemed hollowed out, as if their voices had been taken from them. In one Italian chronicle, a monk who vanished from his night post returned 7 months later. He was found sitting silently in the cloister garden at dawn. His eyes were open, but he never blinked. His lips moved constantly, forming words no one could understand. He lived only 2 days more, during which he refused food, water, or prayer, until he simply lay down and stopped breathing. It is tempting to dismiss such stories as myth, yet they persist in the quiet margins of official histories, carefully noted by scribes who were trained to document without embellishment. The warnings not to linger after dusk, repeated across continents, suggest something more than shared imagination. These were not peasants or wanderers prone to folktales, but disciplined men trained in devotion, routine, and silence. If they faltered, it was not through lack of faith. It was because something in those shadows was stronger than their prayers. And so the stories linger in the archives, like echoes no one dares to answer. The monks who disappeared are never officially mourned, never given graves, because no one could claim to know where their bodies lay. They are simply marked as gone absent from the record, erased from the world, swallowed by the silence they once vowed to guard. The early years of the 20th century carried a fever for hidden riches. Across Europe, stories of buried gold, sacred relics, and forgotten tombs lured men into shadowy quests. Among them was a small band of treasure hunters who turned their eyes toward a remote church that had long been avoided by the villagers who lived in its shadow. They were not driven by faith, nor by reverence. They came armed with picks, ropes, and whispers of a sealed chamber beneath the stone floor. For months, the men prepared in secret. They studied old maps, collected half-legible manuscripts, and convinced themselves that behind those weather-worn walls lay something older than the church itself, perhaps an artifact carried from Jerusalem, or gold smuggled during wars long past. At last, under the cover of a moonless night, they crept into the churchyard and began their excavation. It is said the first blow of the pickaxe echoed unnaturally through the stone, as though the ground itself recoiled at being disturbed. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated only by the scrape of metal against rock. Then, as the ground gave way, they uncovered what appeared to be an ancient seal. It was a slab, etched with faded symbols no one among them could read. Some later swore the markings seemed to shimmer faintly in the lamplight, as if unwilling to remain dormant. One man, more impatient than the rest, pressed his hand against the seal and muttered that it was only old stone. But when he forced it loose, a sound rolled out from the earth, not the crack of breaking rock, but a deep, hollow sigh, like the release of something long imprisoned. They did not stay to investigate further. Whether it was fear or the sudden chill that swept over them, the group abandoned their tools and scattered. At dawn, only 3 of the treasure hunters had returned to the nearby village. The 4th was missing. 2 days later, his body was found in the woods. Or rather, something that had once been his body. His skin was stretched thin, his hair bleached white, and his eyes clouded over with a milky haze. He looked not like a man who had vanished for 48 hours, but as though he had aged half a lifetime in that brief absence. No animal marks scarred him, no weapon had drawn his blood. Only the unnatural weight of years pressed upon him all at once. The villagers who first saw him whispered of curses, of spirits bound beneath the church for centuries. Local authorities, eager to prevent hysteria, ruled the death as exposure. His companions, however, were never the same. 2 left the region entirely, claiming that shadows followed them wherever they went. The 3rd was said to have descended into madness, carving symbols into his own walls that resembled the very markings on the broken seal. From that night onward, the church carried a different silence, not the quiet of reverence, but the hush of dread. Parishioners who once lit candles at dawn began to pray only from their doorsteps, unwilling to step across the threshold. The priest avoided mention of the incident altogether, offering only a single remark that became a lasting phrase in the village. "The seal is not ours to break." What lingered beneath that slab remains unknown. Some believe it was an old burial chamber, sealed by monks who feared what lay within. Others whisper of older faiths, rituals carved into stone long before the church was ever raised, rituals meant not to sanctify, but to contain. The death of the treasure hunter was buried as quickly as his body, his name fading from records within a year. Yet the story endured in fragments, told quietly in taverns or murmured to restless children as a warning. No one dared to dig again. No one dared to touch the place where the seal had cracked. But the memory remained, like a wound that never fully closes. And with it, a darker question. If something was released that night, did it return to its prison, or did it walk silently into the world, wearing time as its cloak? There are places where history clings to the air, not as dust or ruin, but as something alive breathing, watching, waiting. The chapel in the hills is one such place. It was once a sanctuary, built on ancient foundations, whose stones predate even the oldest churches in Europe. Yet over the centuries, the whispers that surrounded it grew louder than the hymns once sung within its walls. For those who dared to enter, the chapel became less a house of God and more a threshold to something else entirely. What began as local superstition soon found validation in the most unsettling way. When a team of surveyors brought thermal drones to scan the structure, their cameras captured more than crumbling masonry. At first, it was a flicker, a ripple of heat moving against the grain of stone and shadow. But as the footage slowed, it revealed something grotesque and deliberate, something shaped like a figure cloaked in smoke, yet shifting as if it was never truly bound to one form. The villagers were not surprised. They had long spoken of an entity that dwelled in the chapel, an unholy sentinel tasked with guarding the relic believed to be sealed beneath the altar. Its presence was not seen but felt. They insisted through sudden drops in temperature, the crackle of unseen fire, the sense of lungs tightening as if the very air was resisting intrusion. Some called it a monk who had died protecting the relic, punished for eternity. Others swore it was not human at all, but a creature summoned centuries ago to keep trespassers at bay. Accounts grew darker as the years passed. Farmers who wandered too close claimed to wake the next morning with blistered skin, as though burned by invisible hands. Shepherds avoided the grounds entirely after a boy was found at the chapel's threshold, trembling and mute, his eyes glazed as though he had seen something that stripped language from his mind. The priests sent to bless the site never stayed long. Their rituals were hurried, their gazes nervous, and none returned twice. The figure captured on the drones matched these descriptions with unnerving precision. It appeared as smoke but moved with weight, its outline jagged yet purposeful. Observers noted that the shape seemed to expand whenever it neared the relic's resting place, almost as if feeding on the chapel itself. Skeptics argued it was nothing more than heat distortion. Yet when cross-referenced with sound recordings from inside, the evidence became harder to dismiss. The tapes revealed a low, rhythmic sound beneath the static, like a chant being whispered backward. Legends wove these modern fragments into an older tapestry. According to one folktale, the chapel was erected over the ruins of a pagan shrine. The relic hidden, there was said to be no Christian artifact, but a shard from a fallen star that ancient priests believed could pierce the veil between worlds. When the church inherited the site, it buried the relic deep beneath the altar, binding it with prayers, but not before summoning a guardian. That guardian, villagers say, took the form of a being neither beast nor man, clothed in perpetual smoke, the embodiment of vows spoken in fear, meant to ensure the relic would never see daylight again. For centuries, this story was told as a warning, a way of keeping curious children away from the chapel's decaying steps. Yet the modern encounters gave it new weight. Paranormal investigators who sneaked in with cameras often abandoned their work in panic. One group described feeling pressed against the walls by unseen hands, their equipment drained of power as though something had reached into the batteries themselves. When they fled, they found deep scratches across their gear cases, though the stone floors inside were smooth and unbroken. It is said the creature does not attack outright, but waits, testing the resolve of those who enter. It punishes not with death, but with fear so raw it leaves its victims scarred long after they escape. Those who disturb the altar are marked more severely. A villager recounted how his uncle, years ago, dared to pry a stone loose from the chapel floor in search of hidden treasure. Days later, he was found wandering the woods barefoot, his body covered in ash, though no fire had touched him. He lived, but never again spoke of what he saw. The presence of the creature has become inseparable from the identity of the chapel. Some believe it is the relic itself that projects this form, a manifestation of the object's will to remain untouched. Others argue it is a curse, born from centuries of ritual and fear layered over one another until they congealed into something autonomous. Either way, the villagers accept it as a reality. To them, the chapel is not abandoned, it is occupied, and the figure within is not a ghost to be exorcised, but a warden to be avoided. Even today, when outsiders ask about the chapel, the locals grow quiet. They do not mock the stories. They do not smile. They simply shake their heads and insist that whatever rests in that place is best left alone. Because if the relic is truly guarded by something shrouded in smoke, then disturbing it is not an act of curiosity. It is an invitation to awaken a sentinel that was never meant to slumber. For centuries, whispers circulated through the Vatican's inner halls of a secret proposal, a radical plan that was quickly buried and never spoken of again. In the archives, fragments of documents describe a chilling idea: to exorcise the church itself. Not a person, not a place, but the institution as a whole. The thought was both unthinkable and blasphemous. Yet there it was, ink on parchment, hidden in sealed reports. The Vatican had long dealt with strange disturbances, unexplained shadows within sacred chambers, cold drafts in sealed corridors, priests speaking of dreams too vivid to dismiss. Some believed these were not random hauntings, but symptoms of something deeper, something embedded in the very structure of the church. Exorcisms are meant to cast out a force that does not belong, but the proposal warned of an unprecedented danger, that the rites might not banish the presence, but anchor it even further. One chilling phrase survives from those hidden notes: rituals could strengthen what is bound instead of destroying it. The words struck terror among those who read them. If the Vatican itself was serving as a kind of prison, a spiritual cage forged through centuries of devotion, then attempting to purify, it might tear open the lock. The walls of the church could be less sanctuary and more seal, and whatever they were built to contain might not be human. Those who dared to discuss the matter spoke in veiled terms. One described the Vatican's foundation as a key driven into the heart of an ancient wound. Another wrote that the church had become a chalice that holds more than wine. Such metaphors hint at something buried beneath, or perhaps woven into, the faith itself. Why was the idea abandoned? Because the risks outweighed the benefits. A ritual of this scale would require countless priests, relics of immense power, and prayers never meant for mortal tongues. Should the ritual fail, the cost would not be a single life, but the release of a force that had been kept silent for centuries. The theory that the Vatican serves as a living cage is not without precedent. Throughout history, sacred architecture has often doubled as containment. Temples built over ancient wells said to hold spirits. Shrines constructed where sacrifices once took place, their holy ground sealing away what demanded constant appeasement. Even pagan monuments were sometimes absorbed into Christian structures, the stones themselves carrying hidden histories of blood and worship. If the Vatican's architects knew, if they were consciously designing not only a house of God, but also a prison for something unspeakable, it would explain why certain areas remain sealed, why rituals are repeated without full understanding of their origin, and why the Church has always insisted on being both the shepherd and the gatekeeper. Imagine the weight on those who discovered the truth. To believe that every Mass, every candle lit, every prayer whispered within those walls was not just worship, but maintenance, an ongoing act of reinforcement, preventing cracks in the seal. Perhaps this is why the Vatican has always guarded its archives with near-paranoid secrecy, not simply to protect history, but to prevent anyone from piecing together the shape of what lurks behind it. Some accounts suggest that attempts were made, small and cautious. Limited rituals performed at night by trusted clerics. When these failed, or when the effects became unpredictable candles flaring without flame, walls groaning like living wood, the efforts were abandoned. The silence that followed was louder than any proclamation. The Church never admitted to the experiment, but those who knew carried the memory like a curse. And yet the danger remains. A cage, no matter how strong, is never eternal. Stones erode, walls crumble, prayers fade. If the Vatican's true role has been containment all along, then every year, every century that passes increases the risk of fracture. What was once bound may be waiting for weakness, for hesitation, for a moment when devotion falters and the seal loosens. The abandoned ritual, the exorcism that never was, may have been humanity's last chance to confront what lies beneath. Instead, leaders chose to preserve the lock, fearing the consequences of what might be unleashed. The result is a haunting paradox. A church that saves millions of souls, while perhaps imprisoning something far darker in the process. Even today, priests trained in exorcism whisper of boundaries they will not cross. They speak of prayers forbidden, not because they are powerless, but because they are too powerful, capable of cutting through bindings that were never meant to be touched. The Vatican denies these rumors. Yet the fragments remain those words scrawled long ago, words that still chill the blood of anyone who reads them. Rituals could strengthen what is bound instead of destroying it. The Church may not just be a sanctuary. It may be a lock, a seal, a prison of stone and faith. And the most terrifying possibility is not that the ritual failed. It is that the ritual was never truly attempted, because those who knew understood a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. Sometimes, what is caged must remain caged, no matter the cost. The Vatican Vault is more than just a storage chamber for manuscripts and relics. It is a symbol, a fortress where human curiosity collides with divine prohibition. For centuries, it has stood as one of the last great locked doors of civilization, guarded by silence, secrecy, and tradition. Each brick of its walls has become a metaphor for the things humanity was never meant to uncover. And yet, the very act of sealing something away almost guarantees it will be pursued. When whispers spread of hidden gospels, lost technologies, or even prophecies of the world's end resting inside, they do more than ignite curiosity. They awaken obsession. Scholars argue over fragments of information that slip through cracks. piecing together theories from faint references and veiled admissions by clerics. Meanwhile, skeptics counter that much of what is said about the vault is born of paranoia and myth. But even they cannot ignore one truth. The Vatican has spent centuries ensuring that the deepest layers remain unseen. The debate of whether the vault should stay sealed is not one of mere academic interest. It is a struggle between fear and longing. If the vault contains sacred relics, such as the fabled Ark of the Covenant, or relics of Christ himself, opening it could spark the greatest spiritual revival in human history. But if it holds texts that challenge the very foundations of Christianity, the faith of billions could fracture in a single stroke. The danger is not only theological. Imagine if suppressed knowledge about advanced science, alchemy, or even ancient technologies were suddenly released. Some argue this could catapult civilization forward centuries. Others warn it could destabilize society, granting dangerous knowledge to those least prepared to wield it. The atomic age has already shown us that humanity does not always handle revelation responsibly. The question, then, is not simply what is inside, but whether humanity is capable of receiving it without tearing itself apart. The guardians of the vault continue their vigil, insisting that their role is one of preservation, not suppression. To them, premature exposure of certain truths could do more harm than good. And yet, history reminds us of what happens when powerful institutions guard too tightly. Every secret eventually finds its way to the surface, and the longer it is buried, the more explosive its unveiling becomes. Think of the Dead Sea Scrolls, hidden for centuries until their rediscovery shook the foundations of biblical scholarship. Think of the Nag Hammadi texts, which revealed alternate Christian writings, once thought lost forever. Each revelation altered the way humanity saw itself, sometimes in ways unsettling, sometimes liberating. If those discoveries were only fragments, what might the Vatican vault hold in its depths? The weight of possibility is suffocating. Could the vault contain maps of forgotten continents, written by civilizations we barely acknowledge existed? Could it hold documents that prove human history stretches back far further than we imagine, hinting at cycles of lost ages? Or could its shelves simply cradle dust, old ledgers, and theological musings that the world has inflated into legend? The lack of certainty keeps the debate alive and keeps the vault at the center of one of history's most persistent mysteries. The longer it stays sealed, the more its myth grows. Conspiracy theorists paint it as a Pandora's box of forbidden truths. Archaeologists argue it could contain priceless knowledge that should be studied, not hidden. Religious faithful fear both outcomes: the shattering of belief or the confirmation of something too divine for mortal hands. It is a paradox that tightens with every passing century. The vault is most powerful precisely because it is closed. And so humanity waits, staring at a locked door that has not opened in centuries. Each generation inherits the same temptation: to break the seal, to pry open the vault, to finally know. And each generation leaves it untouched, fearing the consequences of a revelation too great to control. The vault has become more than a physical chamber. It is a test, a moral line, a psychological trial of restraint, a question of whether we value stability more than truth. Perhaps the greatest secret of the Vatican vault is not what lies within, but the silence it inspires. It has become a mirror, reflecting back humanity's deepest desires and darkest fears. For in truth, we do not know if we are ready for what it hides. Some believe that is the very reason it has remained sealed, not because of malicious intent, but because those who guard it understand something about human nature that we refuse to accept. Knowledge, once unleashed, cannot be contained. And yet, there is a counterpoint. Humanity has always advanced by confronting the unknown. Fire was once feared as divine punishment, yet it became the foundation of civilization. The stars were once thought to be unreachable lights, until humanity stepped onto the moon. Each forbidden frontier has eventually become part of human progress. Could the vault be the next? Could what waits inside be less a curse and more a destiny, withheld until the world is finally ready? But readiness is a fragile illusion. Consider what even small revelations have done to the modern world. A leak of classified documents destabilizes governments. A newly unearthed scientific discovery disrupts industries overnight. Multiply that chaos by centuries of hidden truths, and the scale becomes unimaginable. This is the storm that Vatican authorities fear, not a flood of curiosity, but a flood of consequences. It is said that when knowledge is locked away, myths rush in to fill the void. And so the vault has become a canvas for humanity's imagination. Some envision treasures and holy relics. Others picture scrolls that tell of alien visitors or civilizations that predate recorded history. Others whisper of darker contents, objects so profane that even touching them could invite disaster. These stories may never be proven, but they thrive in the silence because the vault never speaks for itself. Perhaps that is why its mystery is eternal. The vault is not only about what is hidden, but about what we project onto it. It is the perfect riddle, unsolvable because the answer is locked away. And as long as it remains sealed, the vault is alive, not as a room of stone and steel, but as a legend woven into the collective psyche of humanity. Explorers, conspiracy theorists, and archaeologists continue to argue. Should it remain locked forever, or should it be opened at last? Some believe it could grant access to the lost knowledge of ancient civilizations. Others warn that within its walls lies the kind of truth that would tear society apart. The vault has become both shrine and warning, a place where knowledge sleeps, untouched, waiting. And the haunting question that lingers at the end of this long pursuit is simple, yet terrifying. If the walls collapse on their own, if time itself forces open the vault without human hands, will humanity be ready for what emerges?